We're going to begin now looking at Chapter 7 of the Art of War, called The Fray. It begins, Master Sun said, "In war, the general receives orders from his sovereign, assembles his troops, and forms an army. He makes camp opposite the enemy. The true difficulty begins with the fray itself." Up to this point in the Art of War, Sun Tzu's point has mainly had to do with strategy, with coming up with good plans. And now he's saying that's all well and good, but a general's only good if he can win the fray, if he can go into the battle itself and actually be effective. Many of you might have been thinking the same sort of thing. What's interesting is with this chapter entitled The Fray, we don't get too much specific advice about the actual battle itself. We have to wait a little bit longer but before we get that. Sun Tzu is still in this chapter concerned with actually getting to the battle site with the actual route and supplies and things like that. That's more concerned here. Sun Tzu's first theme here is the crooked and the straight. I'll begin reading. "The difficulty of the fray lies in making the crooked straight, and in making advantage of misfortune. Take a roundabout route and lure the enemy with some gain. Set out after him, but arrive before him. This is to master the crooked and the straight." One thing that Master Sun is interested in doing is in finding the crooked qualities in the straight and the straight qualities in the crooked. So if we think about the example of straight first, this is yang energy, this is direct, it gives speed, it gives power, it's the quickest route to something with the least amount of friction. In your troops' morale up and supplies, this is probably going to be, in some ways, your best bet. But that doesn't mean that it's without its detriments. When you take this direct route, it gives one the idea of that you know exactly where you're going and why you're going there. It has a sense of purposefulness, and that can be played to your advantage or it can be to your disadvantage. When you make a straight line, people think, okay, I know exactly where you're going, and if you do indeed go there, they can be prepared to defend it. If you give them that feeling of a direct line, they send all their troops there, and then you take another route, then you sort of manage to make a weakness out of that. So you start off yang, and then you end up being yin, and you end up sort of finding a gain out of that. There are other ways to think of this idea of the indirect route versus the direct route. If we think about climbing up a mountain, if the mountain's very, very steep, you'll see, particularly if there are cars and things like that, the cars will take a winding route up this mountain, so you don't try to go straight up a hill that's this steep. So this is a way that an indirect route can actually let you preserve more strength, more power. It's less grueling, although it's going to take you longer. It's going to take a longer period of time. You'll have more energy by the time that you get there. So some of these sorts of qualities, ideas of power and of fullness, these are achieved by yin in this instance, by an indirect route, and not by yang, by a direct route. On page 198, there's also some commentary to this particular passage, which I think is helpful. So I would point you guys there to get further enlightened. Next, Sun Tzu briefly addresses the fray itself. He writes, "The fray can bring gain, it can bring danger. Throw your entire force into the fray for some gain, and you still may fail." One thing that Sun Tzu is saying here is that war is potential. You have to go into the fray in order to get the advantage, but you can also lose by entering the fray. So we say, if you want to win, you have to play the game, and it seems that Sun Tzu is saying much the same thing. If you want the advantages of war, you have to go through the war. But as soon as you enter into that, you're potentially going to lose whatever you have as well.